Ukraine builds counter-battery radar to rival U.S. tech and TPQ-36. That's the headline for December 29, 2025. And before we start, subscribe to Defense Reports. It's your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. I'm Alex. Join me with Aurea in this latest deep dive by Defense Report for a sharp, no-nonsense breakdown of the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments. And today we're going to cover, well, the radical transformation of artillery warfare, where tactical genius, high-tech systems, and, believe it or not, even the weather are the deciding factors on the battlefield.
Welcome, and our goal today is really to give you a shortcut, a deep dive into the source material that shows these incredible dynamics unfolding in the conflict.
Absolutely. We're going to examine the battlefield tactics, the technological adaptations, and crucially, the state of the Russian military-industrial complex as it really strains to keep up.
And we have some amazing things to unpack for you. For instance, we're going to talk about how this conflict has basically thrown out the rulebook on artillery. We're not talking about massed fire anymore.
No, not at all. It's about pinpoint destruction with just one or two guns. It's a huge shift.
And we'll get into the tech that makes that possible.
And then there's this. This is genuinely unbelievable. We're going to reveal the very specific atmospheric conditions, we're talking about the weather, that let Ukraine detect and target the Russian warship Moskva when it was way over the horizon.
A perfect case of using the environment as a weapon. And finally, we'll dig into Russia's military production, the massive push for drones, programs that are using school children in factories, and its, total reliance on countries like North Korea for basic artillery.
It's a deep dive into how digitalization and speed are just dismantling old-school military doctrine. So let's start with this revolution in artillery.
Right. So artillery is still the god of war. That hasn't changed. But how it's being used has been turned on its head. For decades, since World War II, the idea was mass fire.
Just saturation, right? Throw hundreds of shells at a target area.
Exactly. But in an age of drones and advanced counter-battery radar, a big group of guns is just a giant target. It's a death sentence.
And that's the core shift our sources point to. Ukraine was forced to adapt, and fast. So instead of these big, obvious batteries, they've moved to a dispersed formation.
Which really just means the destructive work is being done by maybe one or two guns at most. And the second they fire, they're gone. They move.
That's a fundamental break from doctrine, isn't it?
It is, and it's only possible because of the technology. You need longer range, you need precise GPS, and the most critical piece is the computerized automated fire control system, or AFCS.
Okay, let's pause on AFCS. That sounds like jargon, but it sounds like it's the real game changer here. What is it actually doing for that single gun crew?
Think of it this way. It replaces a big vulnerable command post with a smart computer that's right there on the gun. It does all the complex math instantly.
So things like trajectory, wind, distance, all that?
All of it, in real time. So instead of a slow chain of command, commander gets coordinates, does calculations, radios the gun gets the target data, and the AFCS tells it exactly where to aim.
And it fires. No waiting.
Precisely. The guns can even talk to each other directly, sending fire missions without a central command post at all. It's decentralization at its most effective.
And the payoff is survivability. The sources are really clear on this. Suddenly, the Russian counter-battery units are hunting for ghosts.
They are. The Ukrainians are preparing maybe 8 or 9 different firing positions for every single platoon, and they're constantly on the move. Fire, move, fire, move.
So that constant maneuver just makes them incredibly hard to hit.
It drastically reduces their vulnerability. And we have the evidence. The data shows Ukrainians are destroying Russian artillery at a significantly increased rate. It proves that the old static battery system is just obsolete in a digital war.
But the Russians are trying to adapt. Right. The sources mention they're also trying dispersed tactics, or the old fire and move method.
They're trying. But they're often held back by legacy systems and a legacy mindset. The crucial difference is that Ukraine fully embraced software-defined warfare. Their digital systems are faster, more integrated.
So lesson 1 is pretty clear. Digitize your fire control or you die. Which brings us to digitizing intelligence itself. Situational awareness.
This is where Ukraine's IT capacity becomes a massive strategic advantage. We're talking about systems like Delta, which is already NATO compliant, and Krapiva. These are the digital brains of the entire operation.
And these aren't just fancy maps, right? They're data fusion engines.
That's a perfect way to put it. They're pulling in real-time intelligence from everything: drones, counter-battery radar, satellites, intel from troops on the ground.
And fusing it all into one coherent picture.
Yes, and the revolutionary part is that it filters out the noise. It's designed to only show a commander the important information, what you need to act on right now. It prevents that information overload that can cripple a command post.
Which allows for incredibly rapid, precise decision-making. And to show just how far that intelligence can reach, let's talk about the sinking of the Russian flagship, the Moskva.
This is such a fascinating case study because it shows how something you'd never think of, meteorology, can define a military operation.
So when the Moskva was hit back in April 2022, it was way beyond the normal radar horizon. A ground radar can typically only see about 46 kilometers because of the Earth's curvature. The Moskva was much, much further out.
And yet they saw it. And the reason, confirmed by meteorological data, is a phenomenon called anomalous propagation, AP.
Okay, so the atmosphere itself basically acted like a giant lens for the radar waves for a few hours.
That's a great analogy. It's all about the atmospheric index of refraction. Under very specific conditions, warm air over cooler water, the index changes with height, and it causes the radar waves to literally bend downwards following the curve of the Earth.
So the radar could effectively peer over the horizon. That's called atmospheric ducking, right?
Exactly. Super refractive conditions. It allowed Ukraine's Mineral U radar to get a clean detection on this huge warship. We're talking a massive radar cross-section at over 135 kilometers away.
And here's the intelligence kicker. The sources show that this atmospheric window was only open for about 5 hours that day, between 16:00 and 21:0000.
So they had to predict it, detect the ship within that window, and launch the attack. It's an incredible fusion of environmental intelligence and precision strike capability. Just proves that knowledge and speed can beat raw power.
And that gap in capability forces us to look at the other side, the Russian military-industrial complex, which is just scrambling to replace staggering losses.
And the scale of those losses is mind-boggling. The source material confirms nearly 10,000 armored vehicles, including tanks, lost by January 2025.
10,000. So the pressure on their MIC is immense. And their solution isn't really new production, is it?
Not for tanks, no. We saw their so-called tank production surge by 215%, but when you look closer, it's overwhelmingly just refurbishing old Soviet-era stock, T-62s, even T-55s.
So they're pulling museum pieces out of storage to fill the gaps.
It shows they just can't mass-produce modern tanks quickly enough. And we see a similar story with artillery. Production is up, maybe 150%, but their domestic shell production is just barely keeping up.
What's the number on that?
They can produce a maximum of about 3.5 million shells a year, which sounds like a lot, but their baseline firing rate is about 10,000 shells a day.
So they're running right at their absolute limit just to maintain that tempo.
Exactly. And if they fall behind, they give Ukrainian forces critical breathing room. That's why they're so reliant on external partners. The sources confirm over 100 artillery systems have come from North Korea alone.
So while they're importing old artillery, their real domestic focus has shifted.
To drones. Unmanned aerial vehicles. They've tripled production. The Alabuga facility, where they build the Shahed drones, has massively expanded.
And the numbers are huge. Almost 6,000 Shahed-type drones in the first 9 months of 2024. And a total capacity for 4,000 drones of all types per day.
The strategy is sheer volume. And they're trying to make them smarter, integrating machine learning into models like the Lancet to counter Ukrainian electronic warfare.
So they're getting better, and the range is increasing.
But even with this massive effort, the sources expose these deep, critical vulnerabilities in their system.
The first one being a labor crisis. They just can't find enough skilled people.
Right. They're paying almost double the national average for MIC jobs, which just screams desperation. You can't just build a factory, you have to have the people to run it.
Second is the supply chain. Sanctions are biting, and they are totally reliant on China for the electronics. Radio parts, guidance components, everything.
And finally, you have these really disturbing ethical and operational problems.
Like using child labor to build drones at Alabuga.
Yes. And beyond that, this push to centralize production means the equipment isn't always getting to the front line with everything it needs. FPV operators are reporting they don't have essential gear like air repeaters.
So they're mass-producing drones, but the soldiers on the ground can't use them effectively.
It's a classic top-down system failure. Mass production means nothing if the end user can't make it work on the battlefield.
So let's bring this all together. The big takeaway from this deep dive is that, knowledge, speed, and decentralization are beating mass and legacy doctrine.
Precisely. Ukraine's success is about its ability to rapidly digitize, to leverage its own incredible volunteer IT talent to create bottom-up solutions like Delta and Krapiva, and to integrate that with NATO standards.
And for you, the listener, the sources just make it crystal clear why knowledge and speed are everything on the modern battlefield. It doesn't matter if it's predicting the weather to sink a flagship or using an app to make your artillery survivable.
But this agility rests on something really interesting. So much of Ukraine's technological edge comes from these rapid, volunteer-driven software systems, which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider. What is the perfect balance between that kind of high-risk, super-fast civilian innovation that wins battles and the long-term systemic government support you need to standardize, secure, and sustain those technologies for the long haul?
You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Arya, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.